Hello and welcome back to Painting with Artie Julie. Today we're going to be looking at doing a painting of these lovely brightly coloured goldfish and using a little salt in the background to give the effect of the air bubbles. The downloads will be available on the website if you want the full details of these, and also a little cheat sheet if you need the help for that. Okay, let's get going. So we're going to start by drawing a design out of some goldfish. You only want a few of them. Try and think of an odd number. And I tend to draw my design on a scrap piece of paper first, and then scribble on the back with a soft pencil, and then go back over the lines to transfer it onto my watercolour paper. I tend to do that quite a lot with my designs, so I don't do lots of rubbing out on the piece of paper. If you need this cheat sheet, you will be able to download it off my website. I'll put that to one side for the moment because I've already done that. I've already transferred the picture over, so I know how I'm going to work, or where I'm going to work. We're going to do the background first. So with watercolours we tend to work from the weakest, wettest washes first, which is going to be the background area. And to create little bubbles, let me just show you this one. To create these air bubbles coming up here, we're going to use salt. Salt will absorb the paint in little places. So we have to get the salt ready and waiting. And the size of the salt crystals makes the size of the bubbles vary. If it's rock salt, it's too big. If it's table salt, it's too fine. So I find a freshly ground bit of salt is usually all right. I'm going to prepare that first. So I've got a little bit of that ready and waiting. So then I've got that here, so I can just pinch it on where I need it when it's all wet and waiting. So I'm going to put that on in a moment. So first of all, we're going to put the colour into the background, and I'm going to use quite a strong blue, a Prussian blue or a phthalo blue, or anything or an intense blue, anything which is a nice strong bright blue. And I've just here mixed up some colours, puddles of paint. So over this side in my little palette here, I've mixed up these puddles of paint. So quite a large puddle of the blue, quite strong, a little bit of a stronger one, so a little less water with that and more paint. And then to another little puddle, I've added some the Prussian blue and a bit of cadmium yellow to make a nice strong green colour. So we can vary that background a bit and put some pondweed and things like that in. So just clean my brush and dry it on a bit of kitchen roll and put that to one side. I'm going to use some clean water and a mop brush now to wet all the background area. If you think you're going to be a bit wobbly around here, you could mask out all these fish, but I think we should be able to work around them. They're big areas, they're not too fiddly to work around. So I'm going to take my mop brush, clean water, and coat all this background area carefully up around the fish, carefully around the edges of the fish, and keeping it wet. If you use a good quality watercolour paper, such as a Bockingford, and I think this is 425 gram weight, you'll find it stays wet longer. If you're using a cheaper, thinner paper, which you can do, you might find you have to double wet it. Wet it carefully once, then mix your paints up, and then re-wet it again before you start. It needs to stay glossy wet, otherwise it will go streaky and patchy. So I'm just carefully wetting around these fish, so just following those shapes around there. So it's going to stay nice and glossy wet all over. Just be careful around the fins because you want to keep those a little bit paler. Bring it up around the edges. Then you should be able to tilt your piece of paper, or if you have it stuck to a board like I do, you can tilt your board and see where it's shiny wet. So if you keep moving your head or moving your board around, you can see where there's any dry patches in there. So it's got to stay nice and glossy wet. So a lot of this is just about the background. The fish themselves don't take much time at all to paint, but the background is the bit where you have to be a little bit more careful with it to get it right in the first place. And it's another useful reason for making a cheat sheet for yourself, a little template, so that if it does go horribly wrong, you can very quickly transfer it onto another piece of paper and do it again very quickly. Right, that's just about done. Hopefully you can see that staying glossy wet all over apart from the fish. So just taking out any puddles so it's not sitting in puddles but staying glossy wet. I'm just going to tilt that a little bit. I don't really see that catching the light there, but it's glossy wet all over apart from the fish. So just put a little bit more at the top there before I start. Big brush now, the biggest brush you've got to paint with. So this is something like a 12 or 14 round. Just wet it a little bit to get it going there. And then we're into the big puddle of Prussian blue. And we just roll that in the paint, and then we're going to go for it. Straight across the top here, and working down across your picture. Just let it overlap, have your board slightly tilted so it just runs down the piece of paper. Just working backwards and forwards across the paper here, carefully lapping over the last layer that you just put on there. And because it's wet, it'll just blend in together hopefully, and it should just start to blend in. Don't do all round one fish and then right down to the bottom. Just work round one and then go back over to the other side, and just keep your brush loaded with paint as you go down the piece of paper, backwards and forwards. I think I've just lost a fin there, but never mind, it won't matter too much. So you're going backwards and forwards across here, just gently overlapping the last layer that you put on there, working steadily down the piece of paper, and then across this one. So as I was saying, don't work all the way around one fish and fill it in. You've got to work across the paper and down at the same sort of rate. So as I do this one down here, I'm just going to bring it across through here and then round the next one, working fairly quickly, just steadily down your piece of paper. Make sure you've got enough paint mixed up before you start, and just working backwards and forwards with this. This is the tough bit of this painting. After this it's all very easy, but getting this to look nice and smooth. I'm just going to go into that other paint, just get it a little bit stronger towards the bottom here. Just bringing it across. And then down past this one, keeping it going. Whatever you do one side of a fish, make sure it comes out the other. Across and down. And on this particular one, I'm going to add in a few little background bits of pondweed as well into this. You can just leave it as a plain blue, but it's quite nice to put a little bit of texture into this as well. So now I've got down to the bottom, just check the edges at the puddles sitting on the edges there, and breathe. Don't forget to breathe, you've probably been holding your breath all that time. So now I'm just taking the stronger, darker colours that I've got here and just bringing up a few little wiggly lines into this background to give me bits of pondweed. This is the Prussian blue and cadmium yellow, just to give a bit of interest to that background and make it stronger and make these fish stand out a bit more by putting in a little bit more interest into the background. Try and start at the bottom and lift your brush off as you work, so it follows through where the fish are. It's kind of a bit wide on that one. Let's just bring it a bit wider down there. So before I finish, I'm just going to dry my brush, take out any little puddles here around the edges. If your board's tilted, you'll tend to have puddles at the bottom. Make sure that you haven't got any puddles sitting around the edge here, even to the point where you just take a bit of tissue around the edge, especially if you've taped all around the edge. Then make sure it dries, otherwise this is where it will sit here and you'll get a cauliflower coming back into it. So before we finish, this little bit of salt, just going to pinch that in and just drop it just gently where the fish are likely to be causing bubbles. And this has got to go in while the paint's still wet, because otherwise it won't do anything at all. Just a few little bits here and there. It is just a pinch of salt, 20 grains. Don't think, oh, it's not doing anything, and put another 20 on there, because you'll find you have no paint left. And that's it. We're just going to let it dry now and let these salt crystals gradually absorb the paint. That's the hard part done now, and as you can see, it's it's dried beautifully. You've got all these little salt crystals have expanded and taken off the paint where they rested on it. It's all dry. I dried it, just finished it off with a hairdryer. I did leave it for 5 minutes or so before for the salt crystals to work before I dried it with a hairdryer, but it's all nice and dry. Where I've wobbled a little bit, I've been taking out the bits with just a little bit of water on my brush, rub it round onto the surface where you want to lift the paint out a little bit, and then just dab it with a tissue. It won't come out completely with a Prussian blue because that does tend to stain your paper, but at least you can lift out some of the bits where you've got a little bit of a peculiar shape here and there. So I'll just take a little bit out of his nose, wet it, rub it quite firmly with a stiffish brush there, and it just starts to lift the paint a little bit. So now we can paint back into these. We need to put some shaping into them first. So I've just mixed up a puddle of a bit of ultramarine blue, and all we're going to do with that is just put it down where we think there's going to be a bit of a shadow onto there, a bit of clean water. I'm just going to dampen this little fish first of all, and then where I think it needs a bit of a shadow, which is probably the underside and around the back end here, I'll just put in a bit of the ultramarine blue just to give it the shaping and a bit of body to it. Really, we could just put the colours on, but it's quite nice to get a bit of roundness to the fish first of all, so that starts to look a bit more like it's a three-dimensional object rather than just a round. So again, this one, just dampen it slightly just with a small brush so it flows and you don't get hard lines with your shading onto it. So bit of water on, take the puddle out, and then we're going to go in with the ultramarine blue, this is just plain ultramarine blue, and put that around just the side there. I think we'll need for that one to give it the shape. I have a little fin sticking out the side there, which will probably catch the light a little bit. And again, with all these now, just dampening them, probably leave that middle fin nice and light. And just a little bit of the blue down the sides of this one, so it's lighter on the top and a little bit more shady around the sides there, perhaps just around the front of the nose. So they look a bit like ghost fish at the moment, but we'll put some colour into them in a few minutes. So with the colours, when we start to do that, you can go as mad as you like with the colours. These goldfish come in all sorts of different shades here, so you can really have some fun with putting in the different shades to them. So a bit of clean water on, just a small brush for this shading, and then a little bit of this ultramarine blue underneath here, just to blend that out to give them a three-dimensional look. Oops, there's a little bit there. I want to take that bit of background out where he's wobbled there, so I'll just rub that and that, dab it. Let's take that back a bit, and it'll look like a bit of the shading, hopefully. Right, so that's all the shading on. That's all we need to do for that. And now I can go back to work on these with putting some colour onto them. So the colours I'm going to use, nice bright lemony yellows. Again, I've mixed up some little puddles of these, ready and waiting. Some nice bright cadmium yellow or warm yellow, medium yellow. A bit of cadmium red or vermilion, it doesn't really matter which colours you use there. And then a bit of the red and the yellow mixed together to give you an orangey colour to it as well. So just making sure I've got plenty of those mixed up. And then if you want to put other colours in, you could put some dark bluey colours into them, ultramarine blue, quite a bit stronger than I've just done with the shadings. A bit of blues there you could put in, or blue and a touch of burnt umber, which will give you a very dark tone as well, because they can have some very dark little spots and things like that onto them. So certain ones have different colours to them. Right, let's just start with one of these now at the top here. I think we're going to just dampen them again. I think it might be a nice idea just to dampen them. You don't have to do that. You can just use if you're using a big area, it's useful to dampen it first. So with this one here, I'm going to paint a lot of yellow all over this one. So I'm going to dampen it. As long as this is dry, which it is now, I can just put a bit of colour water over that, and then use my palest yellow first of all. Always start with your palest colours first and just pop that onto there, over the shadow as well that I've put on there, and that becomes part of the shape of the goldfish. But I'm going to leave it light on the top here. Because it's damp, I can just run a clean brush through there and lift some of that colour out to give me a lighter highlight to it. I'm just lifting it back out again to give me a lighter highlight in some places. It needs perhaps a bit more of the orangey yellow into it as well. Give that a bit more shape underneath there. That's got to be stronger than your first colour to give it a bit more shape. I want to put some little scales and things like that onto the fish, but we'll just leave that at the moment until that's dry. So I'm going to go on to this one now, another more orangey one, but this one's going to have, I want a few more patches of white showing through here. So all I'm going to do with this one is use my first orangey yellow to wet it in certain areas. I'm not going to wet it all over. I'm just going to leave some patches as I come down here. I'm just going to leave some patches without paint on to give me the effect of the lighter markings which are on this fish. You can have different patches, you can have different patterns, you can have different shaped fish, but we're just trying to get some variation into it. Bit of orange onto that as well now. Just building some of that onto it, letting that change in colour as you go with it. Bringing up some different shades there, letting some of the yellowy bits show through. Let's put a bit around his nose as well because that's got a little wobble to it there. And then some of this bright, nice bright red, cadmium red or vermilion colour will just give a little bit more interest to the picture. And for this particular one, I'm going to put some dark spots onto him, or her. I don't know what it is, whether it's a him or a her, this one. So I think it's going to be a him. So we'll put some dark spots on while they're still nice and wet. And just, again, just a bit of patterning, so it makes him look a little bit more rounded. That's with the ultramarine blue and burnt umber, just to give him a bit of interest. They do have these mottled shapes to them. A little bit onto the tail here, just to use a bit more of the ultramarine blue, just to give them a bit of shape to the fins, to build that one up. We'll come back and put the eyes and things like that when these are all dry, and a few scales and things like that. This one over this side, I'm going to have it lots of different colours again, and lots of white into this one as well. So the same sort of thing again. I'm just going to start with, what should we start with? The orangey, the stronger yellowy colour. And again, we're just going to put some squiggles of the yellowy colour on there first. Just a few patches of that. And then straight in with perhaps an orangey colour. And just put some little bits of shaping in there. They have these white patches which vary over the body. And all random shapes, so you don't have to get these in exactly the same place as I'm doing. They have all these different patches and I was going to say designs, but I don't think it's really a design to it. It's just a different shape look to them. Okay, and a bit of the red on this side as well. Nice strong bright goldfish red onto those. It's going over the shading that we've previously put on there, and that will just show through to give me a nice colouring. I'm going to put a bit around the nose as well. That'll probably do for that one. Perhaps have a multicoloured one in here. So with this one, I'm going to start with a bit of blue on him. Just stronger ultramarine blue, not the same colour as the background, otherwise he'll just disappear into the background. So a little bit of ultramarine blue, just put a few little patterns on there, little bits of shaping, perhaps put a bit in the tail as well on this one. Bringing those round, Just a few dots around there. And then let's get back to the goldeny colours again, so he looks a little bit more like a goldfish. Just be careful going in with the yellow, if you don't go too close to the blue at this stage, otherwise it will go a greeny colour. And then put some more reds on as well, so that can go in between the blues and the yellows. Right down to give him a little bit of a nose at the end there. And a bit at the sides. And perhaps a hint of the fins there with that colour. Perhaps a little bit into the tail. That should probably do for that one. Onto this last one, the yellowy one. Down here we're going to have, to try and keep your colours coming through the picture, so I've kept using the yellows throughout here, and again it's just a few patches on this one. We're going to have a yellow and white one down here. Start off with your paler colours first, the lemony yellows, and then let's bring that round, give him his graceful shape there. Then go into the stronger, more orangey yellows. Trying to think about how it would come around his body, perhaps coming down underneath here with the same sort of varying shades, but giving him lots of interest and different colours there. Okay, so that's about all the colouring we've put on there. We've just got to go back in and do the details onto these. You've got to make sure they're dry. So I'm just going to give those a quick blast with the hairdryer, and then we can come back and finish off with all the little bits of the eyes and the scales and things like that. Right, so we're just going to add the last few details, just a hint of the scales, perhaps onto this little one here. We'll just weaken that red down. We're just going to put a few little dashes over here just for where the little scales are going onto the body there. And again, it just helps to give him a bit more shape and make him look a little bit more rounded. So it is literally onto the dry paper now with these, just a few little hints of markings on there. Perhaps if I've wobbled over a fin, I might just put a little hint of that up here with a bit of an orangey colour. Some of the bits like the tail, you just need a little bit of weak ultramarine blue, and you can put a few little hints of the tail fin in. And then you want the all-important eye, which will give them a little bit of life here. And for that, it is just almost a complete circle, but not quite. It's just leave a little bit of light into them. This one doesn't need much at all, really. It's just perhaps an eye somewhere around here. A little bit of the ultramarine blue burnt umber. So it's got this little semicircle. Try and leave a little bit of light in there. Perhaps make that an eye as well, because it's just got a little hint of something. Again, this doesn't need much at all. Just a little tiny circle either side. A bit of a stronger, or ellipse I should say. And then again, this one, we'll just see the eye that side, perhaps just a little hint of something there. Perhaps just tidy those fins up. I'll get a little bit of the paler, weaker ultramarine blue, and we'll just put a hint of fin into those, just because they've gone a little bit wobbly on the edges. And the same with this tail here, a little bit of the weaker blue colour, just to give us something in that one. And last but not least, this little yellow one down the bottom here, we'll just put an eye into there. And perhaps just, again, a few little dashes down here to make those look a little bit more fin-like. And that's it. There we have our finished picture of Goldfish.